as well as the UK, as well as the majority of Europe, as well as the majority of countries in general across the world are all signed up to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal regime. You know, the 17 goals that will see us transform our societies to achieve this better world by 2030. You know, achievements and change that wouldn't have been possible, of course, if it wasn't for all these magical crises that have appeared out of nowhere over the course of the past few years. But that is here nor there. Sometimes I like to question myself in regards to number 5 in the Sustainable Development Goals, which is all about gender equality. And when I ask myself, would Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP and the Scottish Government in general still be hell-bent on implementing as much feminist-related policy into the curriculum, into Scottish society in general? Would it be such a vocal point in our political dialogue? Or would it be a thing that is rarely spoken about if it wasn't for the fact that the Sustainable Development Goal regime was racing on in the background? It's a difficult one, nonetheless, irrespective of whether or not this is just because of some sort of feminist desire that Thin Lips holds dear to her heart, or if this is all about the fact that she wishes to be one of the first countries to be seen implementing every goal and completing each target by 2030. Nonetheless, either way, it's still happening regardless. And of course, the latest instalment in the feminist escapade that never seems to end in Scotland is the Feminist Council, the Advisory Council of Women and Girls. As you can see here on the screen, I know it's very difficult to take your eyes off the hairstyle of the woman in the right hand corner representing the fucking mushroom. I mean, that's what it looks like. I don't know what that's supposed to be. I mean, I know feminists are sort of renowned for having fucking daft hair, but that is just, I don't know. I really don't know what that is. Anyway, that's right. Her name is Anna Allen, a woman admittedly I wasn't that familiar with prior to becoming aware of this screenshot. A screenshot that I must admit has left me somewhat dismayed for many a day now, as I've tried to come to terms with the fact that this wasn't made public. I can only imagine the riveting dialogue that must have been exchanged between these absolute intellectual powerhouses, the feminist gurus. You know, where would we be without their fucking wisdom? But anyway, of course, we have Nicola Thin Lips, the woman responsible, on paper anyway, for creating the Advisory Council of Women and Girls, with the idea behind it centred around getting a bunch of experts together. And when I say experts, we just mean feminist women in society. They all came together so they would generate a rake of policies in their little meetings, and eventually they would have a list of recommendations for Thin Lips to then be given as a sort of gift from a me to you. She would then take these recommendations back to her cabinet, or her parliament, her gender-balanced cabinet, you know, for gender equality and all the rest of it. They would then, supposedly, in theory, you know, go through the motions of debating whether or not to implement these or accept ththese recommendations going forward. And lo and behold, Thin Lips did, in fact, accept every recommendation that the Feminist Council posed towards her. And then the same thing happened the year after that, and the same thing has continued to happen every single year that our list of recommendations has been presented to her. All the while we are still told, to this day we're still told that they're independent of government. You know, they're not tied in any way. Oh, no. Well, you could have fooled me. Because not only do they share an identical ideology to one another, but every time they have their annual meeting that they call the Circle, or as I like to call the Circle Jerk, because I'm really great with my puns, I know. I can't help how witty I can be at times. Thin Lips is always there. You know, they're totally independent of government, but yet the First Minister is either standing on stage to peddle more talking points that only a feminist could conjure up, or she sat there with a front row seat to admire and look in awe through her specky-fitted glasses at the wonder and the wisdom that's been presented to her from the feminists repeating talking points that she would probably repeat herself if she was there instead of them. You know, but nonetheless, so this was announced on the 24th of March. Thin Lips has appointed Talat Yaqub and Mushroom Head here, and they're going to be the new co-chairs of the National Advisory Council for Women and Girls going forward as they move from Phase 1 into Phase 2. Now, the two women at the bottom of the screen is dulcet-toned Louise MacDonald, who was presumably a feminist guru in her day. She, as along with Dr. Emma Jackson, were the initial two co-chairs when it was going through its Phase 1 stage. Now, admittedly, I had no idea about this Phase 2 operation that was planned. I had no idea about a Phase 1. I just assumed it was business as usual. But Well, I stand to be corrected. Anyway, so they've got their hyperlink here, which I'll open up and come on to after the fact. But news just in, and I'm really hoping that at some point I will be provided with a video to go through in this regard, by Christina McKelvey, the Minister for Equalities and Older People and the National Advisory Council on Women and Girls circle of supporters. And a thing that I've started to notice on Twitter, admittedly, I'm not a Twitter user, or an avid one anyway. I only use it solely to access certain Twitter accounts and whatnot, mostly politically, of a political persuasion. But I've noticed an ever-growing trend on publications and posts such as the one you can see on screen, and it's a lot of negativity brewing in the comments. Now, if that's a reflection of wider society, then happy days. So she says here, of course, across the Scottish Government, we are working hard to ensure gender inequality becomes a thing of the past. It's funny because a video that I will play at some point during this video is something that I came across earlier on yesterday from 2015. This thin-lipped baboon had not even been the First Minister of Scotland for 4 months at the time, and she was already trying to set up a programme to get companies to sign up to ensure that by 2020 their boardroom meeting staff and their CEOs, etc., would have a 50-50 women to male ratio all across their companies. And the Parliament as well. She wanted the Parliament to be 50-50, at least 50-50 by 2020, you know. And she peddled an ache of excuses for why there was supposedly gender inequality that was rampant in Scotland at the time. She still peddles the same talking points now. Nothing's changed. Isn't it funny? All the funding, all the rhetoric, all the policy, all the constant yammering on about it, and yet nothing really fucking changes. And the only changes that ever do occur are changes that are created in the back of forcing in women into positions of power, prioritising women, etc., at the detriment of men, may I add. They specialise in women's representation and participation, with Talat Yaqub, the co-founder of Women 50-50. That's not quite accurate, is it? You know, if you go onto their Twitter account, for example, it's at least 50-50. So, you know, until such a time as it is at least 50-50, that indicates gender inequality in our parliament. But if it ever goes over 50 to 54, 55, hell, maybe even into the 60s or the 70s, that would be fine. The National Campaign for Fair Representation of Women in Politics and Public Life and Anna Ritchie-Allen, Executive Director of Close the Gap, have been appointed to co-chair the next phase of the First Minister's National Advisory Council for Women and Girls, right? And then Thin Lips is quoted down here as saying that she wants to thank Louise MacDonald, Dr. Emma Jackson, and all the members from the first phase of the National Advisory Council on the WAMNs. Their work and dedication to the goal of greater gender equality has firmly established this council, which is doing exactly what I hoped it would, challenging the government and others to do more to tackle inequality and make Scotland a more equal place for women and girls. Oh, just copy and paste every single time you're asked to comment on something, and it's the same tripe. We are delivering its recommendations across government. Well, of course. Colour me surprised that Nicola Thinlips, the bulka-headed feminist, is implementing feministic policies that she would have ordinarily have conjured up herself had she not been handed them on a platter by a bunch of other feminists. And earlier this month, on International Women's Day, I welcomed publication of the Independent report on misogyny and criminal justice in Scotland, which exists as a result of a recommendation by the council in 2018. Well, there's one common denominator in and around all of that, but let's just dissect that briefly, shall we? So we've got the misogyny bill, the independent quote-unquote misogyny bill, report that will lead to a bill, I should say, regarding the characteristic of women being incorporated into the hate crime protections going forward. But the independent report, negating to address the issue that the Scottish Government themselves wanted the report to be created in the first place, and they obviously had ideal outcomes to come out the other side of that, which funnily enough were all concluded and showcased. We also take into consideration the fact that Helena Kennedy herself went into creating that report, sharing the exact same mindset as Nicola Sturgeon, etc., etc. So I would hardly call it independent. At the bare minimum, I would call it a bias report. And And that's self-explanatory anyway, as I've gone through in a few videos now. When you look at how they've redefined misogyny and all the pish that they come away with in and around that report, it's absolute fucking nonsense. But nonetheless, so then we take into consideration the fact that that all apparently came about, or was initially suggested, due to a recommendation from the Advisory Council back in 2018. So the common denominator in all of this is Nicola Sturgeon, but yet they're both simultaneously independent of her government. Yeah, alright, pull the other one. Anyway, it then goes on to say that later in this parliamentary session we will introduce a new human rights bill which will incorporate the UN's Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women and other human rights treaties into Scots law as far as possible within devolved competence, you know, because this seems to be like the vast majority of Scottish parliamentary time is taken up now about circle jerks and committee sessions where they are talking about ways that they can socially engineer us so we can transform our society to this namby-pamby, wishy-washy, well-being economy state of society, etc., etc. They are all sat there and they all seem to have taken it upon themselves to redefine their job roles. They've gone from being public servants and politicians and puppets, for the most part, by and large, to now adopting the roles of social engineers for the betterment of society. Stop implementing human rights fucking nonsense. Stop peddling progressive talking points and get on with your day job, is what I would probably assume many would argue. And nonetheless, Talat Yakub went on to say here, having been part of the Advisory Council since its inception, I know that the recommendations made were done so with the genuine intention to improve the lives of women and girls in Scotland. With the content of all 3 annual reports accepted and supported, it's now time to ensure these changes are put into action to make this intention into reality. Without this, they are just hopeful words on paper. Over phase 2, we will be focusing on 2 things: accountability and participation. We will be challenging government and beyond to deliver these recommendations effectively and pushing for the needs of marginalised women to be at the centre of design and implementation. Oh, marginalised women, I hear Talat Yakub make reference to. And I wonder what the marginalised woman in this instance would be defined as. Well, I'm pretty sure we can be confident in suggesting she's referring to BAMEs. So she's only been in this position for, what, a day officially, and she's already talking about BAMEs. What a fucking shock. So, this is the first video that I've watched of Mushroomhead. I'm not sure just what's all going to be included, but we can all hazard a guess.
So the gender pay gap is the key indicator that we have for assessing women's equality in the labour market. And that's when we compare women's average hourly earnings with men's average hourly earnings. And in Scotland, the pay gap just now is 15%, which means that for every pound that a man earns, on average, per hour, a woman earns just 85 pence.
It's remarkable to me that these women, I mean, this video here is a few years old, admittedly, but this rhetoric is still used today. Year after year after year, they push misleading notions to try and create a shock and awe factor. Because obviously the underlying takeaway from that is to suggest that we need to do things to ensure that going forward, from this day forward, we will see the average earnings of a man and a woman being equal. But you're not going to achieve that when men are in different jobs to that of their female counterparts. And then they're obviously, as well as that, they're also ignoring the fact that there's a plethora of different jobs that men undertake, you know? It's not like they're all in the same field. There's plenty of men that are working shit, low-paid jobs, the same as women. And there's plenty of men that are CEOs. There's plenty of men that are in the middle, you know? And between the middle and the top and the middle and the bottom, there's a hell of a lot of different pay rates as well as. The same is true for women. So to just compare this side by side is totally misleading fucking shit. But what else do you expect from a feminist?
If we compare full-time average hourly earnings with between men and women, that reduces slightly to 12%. But when we compare women's part-time hourly earnings on average with men's average full-time hourly earnings, the gap leaps to 34%. Which itself is...
But why would you even compare?
Illustrative of the concentration of part-time work in low-paid jobs and sectors.
Okay.
The pay gap is about more than just pay discrimination, though, and
Of course it
it's
is.
caused by a multitude of different factors.
Right, are you ready for this? This is going to be the feminist intellectual hot takes, I assume. Yeah, they always manage to do this. You see that random disparity? You see that random maths equation that we've just presented to you? That misleading maths equation? Well, here's the reason how that really exists. Yeah.
Women have a very different experience of the labour market to men.
Oh, right.
Gender norms and stereotyping about women and men's capabilities and preferences results in women being concentrated into low-paid, undervalued jobs and sectors, and men being concentrated into traditionally male-dominated sectors and jobs. So women are more likely to be found in caring work, cooking, cleaning, admin and retail, and these types of jobs are obviously also largely part-time, and men are more likely to be found in technical and manual occupations, engineering, construction, science. Women still do the majority of unpaid caring in the home, and coupled with a lack of flexible working in many workplaces results in them having to seek opportunities and jobs and the only part-time work was available, which tends to be in the female-dominated sectors that are the low-paid and undervalued in terms of their skills.
Right.
That lack of flexible working and untransparent and biased recruitment and progression practices also contributes to women's underrepresentation in senior levels, which is more commonly known as the glass ceiling.
Oh, of course. Of course. Inequality is an enduring issue because structures perpetuate it. The government, public sector and third sectors and businesses need to lead by example and take steps to restructure Scotland to be gender competent to see the desired changes we seek. Yeah. Structures apparently. Structures are in the way, they're holding the women back, and as a result there's so-called gender inequality that's rampant across society, despite the fact there's not a damn policy that they can name that would indicate that women are held back because they're women in society. Men and women have equal rights, therefore there's no need for feminism, but we don't live in that world anymore. We live in a world where they're redefining terms to suit their narrative. But anyway, and as they say here, it's complex. Yeah, of course it's complex. Promoting gender equality. The Scottish Government recognises that the earliest years of life are crucial to a child's development and have a lasting impact on outcomes and opportunities later in life. We are committed to reducing inequalities from the earliest years, and this is why we have made an unprecedented level of investment into early years, through universal measures such as the expansion of early learning and childcare, nearly doubling the entitlement from 600 to 1,140 hours per year for all 3 and 4 year olds and all eligible 2-year-olds come August 2020. The quality of early learning and childcare is already high in Scotland, with the aim is use the opportunity of the expansion to continually improve the quality of early learning in Scotland. But the key mechanism for this in the national standard, a clear set of quality criteria that any provider offering the funded entitlement will have to meet from August. Gender stereotyping. Academic research highlights the negative impact on all children of gender stereotyping and the important role that early learning can have in positively promoting gender equality. And the important role that early learning can have in positively promoting gender equality. We recognise the importance of addressing gender imbalances in early years. A recent literature review by Education Scotland on improving gender balance found that there are no inherent differences between genders which should limit a young person's interests, capabilities or ambitions. It also highlighted that gender stereotypes and unconscious bias have an impact on children's outcomes in early learning. Listeners may have differing expectations of boys and girls, and it can be boys or girls who can be disadvantaged by this. So identifying and addressing gender stereotyping in these settings can help to reduce a range of gender imbalances. Its partner has been committed to addressing gender stereotyping in early years and settings. This is reflected in a diverse range of actions which aspire to promote gender equality in early years settings and reduce harmful gender stereotyping. We recognise that focusing on a single approach will not result in a sustained change in attitudes, beliefs, values and behaviours around gender stereotyping. The range of actions we are taking are detailed below. So before I even go any further, of course, I mean, it's quite remarkable that the STEM gets a mention, because even today at present they're still talking about STEM, which I'll come on to in a second. We recognise the need to address the gender imbalance in STEM from an early age and are taking action with our partners. The Scottish Government's STEM strategy identifies tackling gender imbalances and other inequities as one of the 4 key challenges for STEM education and training. The first annual report highlights the work that has already been carried out. These include publications of a suite of improving gender balance action guides for teachers and practitioners, an accredited module of professional learning for practitioners currently being trialled, a gender champion network and a gender kite mark are being established to grow and spread best practice. A new team of gender balance and equalities officers have been appointed by Education Scotland to extend and embed the approaches of the successful improving gender balance projects all across schools. We are supporting the ELC, or early learning, sector to promote positive engagement with STEM and tackle gender stereotypes through their parental and family engagement activities, through gender resources, STEM conversation days and sharing existing good practice with the sector. A further commitment into Quality Action Plan is the development of an online national programme of continuous professional learning that's available to all early learning and childcare providers. As part of this, we have contacted the University of the West of Scotland to develop a free STEM online learning module. This is to ensure practitioners have the appropriate skills, knowledge and confidence to deliver STEM learning in early learning. But remember folks, tackling gender stereotyping in early learning will be a key theme within this, and we are aiming to deliver the training by the end of 2019. Absolutely obsessed though with eradicating the gender stereotypes from as young as possible, because they refuse point blank to even accept the mere possibility that maybe as boys and girls get older, they start to become their own people within their own right, and that just so happens that on average girls go one way, boys go the other way, and they have differing interests. It's just the way it's always been. There was a Nordic country, Jordan Peterson made reference to it before, where they completely eradicated anything to do with stereotyping and whatnot, and allowed these people to flourish and develop and become who they wish to be. And wouldn't you know, it ended up being the case that the disparities, if you will, the gender imbalances worsened. When left to their own devices, boys, more often than the previous average, picked more masculine-esque subjects, etc. at school, and girls did the same accordingly. So that blows this whole theory out of the water that the feminists in Scotland, who seem to be behind the times despite the fact they brag to no end about being progressive and ahead of the times and world leading, they're relatively behind the times with the shit they peddle and the myths that they align themselves beside. For people like Sturgeon or this council, for example, to even acknowledge the possibility that these differences between boys and girls / men and women exist naturally, it would then potentially have the consequence of later on down the line calling into question all of the fucking bullshit that they have predicated on the notion that it isn't natural and it is in fact all manufactured via stereotyping. Because if in time it becomes the consensus that it is in fact nothing to do with stereotyping and structures, etc., and there's just inherent differences, then they run the risk of everything they've ever said up until this point falling flat on its face. The argument would fall under its own weight.
The Scottish Government's STEM education and training strategy has set out a range of actions to encourage uptake of science subjects in Scotland's secondary schools. We have invested in a range of measures to develop the capacity of teachers and school leaders to develop inspiring STEM courses and include measures to address the gender imbalance in STEM subjects. Among other initiatives, we support the delivery of science subjects through the school journey through teacher professional development provided by CERC and also through RAISE. CERC also deliver the Young STEM Leader Awards programme, which aims to inspire and reward young people to take up STEM subjects and to encourage their peers to do so.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Reports from the Scottish Qualifications Authority shows that in 2020, young women only make up 28% of higher physics students and 24% of advanced higher physics students. These statistics are the same as to when the SNP came to power in 2007. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that it's vital that young women must be encouraged to study STEM subjects in school? And will she commit to ensuring that the next generation of women feel empowered to pursue STEM careers and continue to close the gender gap?
So you heard it there from Megan Gallagher, probably one of the only attractive females in that parliament, may I add. The figures regarding females going into STEM subjects hasn't really changed all that much since the SNP first came to power all the way back in 2007. Forward to 2015, where Nicola Thinlips hadn't been in Parliament as the First Minister for more than 4 months, fresh off the block, replacing Salmond, and within a matter of months, she's already trying to implement policies to force women into positions of power, CEO roles, etc. And one of the points that she raises during her little speech to the crowd is that she wishes to see more females going into STEM. The reason that there isn't enough females at present going into STEM, allegedly according to her, is the stereotypes from young. That was 2015. Now we're in well, this video was recorded in 2021. We enter 2021/2022, and still there's not been a fucking improvement in STEM. But still, they refuse to even acknowledge the possibility that maybe it's because men and women are different. But it's much more advantageous and it's much more opportunistic to run with the narrative that there is an ever-growing, ever-expanding, ever-existing issue of misogyny because it justifies the feminist ideology to continue to peddle its fucking shit unchallenged.